Today we're diving into one of my favorite fall topics, which is pumpkins. Most of the time when we think about kids and pumpkins, we associate them with Halloween and carving jack-o'-lanterns. But today I'm going to show you how you can take the topic of pumpkins and teach across the curriculum with the help of some of my favorite picture books. So let's start with reading. Part of your first grade reading standards say that kids should be able to ask and answer key details about a story. They should be able to describe the characters and setting in a story, and they should be able to retell the major events of the story. And then finally, they should be able to compare and contrast the adventures of characters. So for me, the best way to cover those standards was always through a picture book. The key to having time to read aloud in your classroom is strategically choosing read aloud based on the standards that you want to teach. In October, I had lots of favorite picture books that would help me teach those literature standards. Creepy Pair of Underwear by Aaron Reynolds and The Good, the Bad, and the Spooky by Jory John. Those were a couple that I loved. But one of my favorites was Spookley the Square Pumpkin by Joe Troiano. So it's a great book to use when you want to teach those literacy standards. You can compare and contrast characters in a story. How was Spookley different from the other pumpkins? You can talk about character traits with Spookley. We'd make a list describing Spookley. That he was brave, compassionate, and helped the other pumpkins. He was friendly and kind, stuff like that. It's also a great book for retelling, and it's excellent for discussing problem and solution. So taking one simple storybook is the perfect way to teach all those literacy standards. You don't have to do it with a boring worksheet. You can do it simply through discussion. And when you use a really cute story like Spookley, kids are going to be more engaged in your lesson. All right, let's move on to math. How can you take that exact same story of Spookley to teach a math lesson? Well, the obvious thing that jumps out from the story is shapes, right? Shapes would be a great math lesson to do with this book. In my room, I had a bunch of different pictures of pumpkins, and the kids would measure them. I found some cute little mini erasers in the shape of pumpkins, and the kids would use those to measure the pumpkin pictures. Now let's talk writing. Another one of my favorite pumpkin books is Pumpkin Pumpkin by Jean Titherington. Not only is this book beautiful because of its watercolor illustration, but it's great because it shows the life cycle of a pumpkin. One way I used this book was to introduce procedural writing, or sometimes we call it how-to writing. After reading the story, we'd start off by making a little life cycle craft. I gave the kids a long sheet of paper that was divided into 4 sections. In the first section, I'd have the kids color a little brown for the dirt, and then they'd glue a real pumpkin seed. And then in the second section, they'd draw a small green vine, and they'd glue a little piece of yellow tissue paper to represent the flower. Then in the next section, I'd give them a little green paint, and I'd give them a Q-tip, and they'd paint a small green pumpkin on the vine. And then finally, in the last section, they'd paint a large orange pumpkin. So then after we'd reviewed the life cycle of a pumpkin and how it grows, we'd take that and turn it into a how-to writing lesson. So that's another way that you can use the subject of pumpkins to teach a really engaging lesson, and kids will actually want to do this writing because they were drawn in by the story of Jamie and the life cycle activity. Another one of my favorite books is called The Pumpkin Book, and it's by Gail Gibbons. And if you aren't familiar with this author, she writes the best nonfiction books for kids. You can use this book in so many different ways. After we read this book, I'd use it for a graphing lesson in math. I'd get 3 different types of food made from pumpkin, like maybe pumpkin pie, pumpkin butter, and pumpkin donuts. I'd give each kid a sample and let them taste it. Remember, the name of the game is getting kids engaged in the lesson, right? And what kid isn't going to be excited about pie and donuts? So after everybody got a chance to try the different foods made from pumpkins, then we'd make a class graph showing which one was our favorite and least favorite. We covered all our math graphing standards in one lesson. I guarantee they learn more about graphing in that one lesson than anything in a math workbook because they actually enjoyed it. And that's what makes the learning stick. Okay, so we've talked about how you can use the topic of pumpkins to teach reading comprehension, math, and writing. Now, what about grammar and science? Well, that Gail Gibbons book that I mentioned a minute ago is perfect for science because it shows the life cycle, what pumpkins need to grow, and it's great for grammar because it shows all these different variety of pumpkins, so it's perfect for teaching adjectives and describing. So here's what you can do. Go to your local pumpkin patch and get about 5 or 6 different kinds of pumpkins. They don't have to be huge, but choose ones that are different colors, shapes, and sizes. Put all the pumpkins on a table or have your kids sit in a circle and pass the pumpkins around. Whenever you let kids touch stuff, it gets them more engaged. And remember, That's what we're trying to do, right? Get them really interested in the lesson so they aren't fooling around, they're paying attention, and ultimately they're learning more, right? All right, so then make a big chart and have kids help you write the words to describe the pumpkin. I always made my chart in the shape of a pumpkin just to make it a little cuter, and the kids would help me write words like bumpy, orange, green, small, tall, striped, all around the outside of the pumpkin. We'd save the middle for later when we carved our pumpkin, and then we come back to write words that describe the inside, like mushy, slimy, stuff like that. Then when we were done, I'd have the kids go back to their table and make their own pumpkin on a big sheet of paper and write describing words all around their pumpkin. All right, so finally, let's finish up this pumpkin unit with some science. After we'd done all of these pumpkin activities over the course of about a week, on Friday, I'd set up some pumpkin stations around the room. The kids would go around to the different stations to do some pumpkin investigation. They'd weigh and measure the pumpkins, see if a pumpkin sinks or floats, and they'd fill out a little journal page at each station. It was a fun way to end our unit and also fit in a little more math and science. If you want to try it in your room, I'll leave the links to all the pumpkin activities and the books in the show notes. I hope this episode really helped you begin to think outside the box on how to get kids re-engaged and bring some joy back to your classroom. So until next time, remember to make learning feel like play, and I'll see you next week.